In a shocking incident that captured the world's attention, UN diplomat Sarah Thompson found herself at the center of an appalling display of prejudice. Her passport, a symbol of her diplomatic status, was cut and labeled as fake by airport officials, humiliating her in front of a crowd. The reason? It appeared to be nothing more than the color of her skin. This story sheds light on the deep-seated issues of systemic racism and abuse of authority that continue to plague societies worldwide. Despite her credentials and calm demeanor, Sarah was treated with suspicion, highlighting the biases faced by countless individuals every day. It is a grim reminder of how power can be misused and how prejudice can cloud judgment, even in professional settings. What makes this story significant is not only Sarah's personal ordeal but the ripple effects it had globally. The incident quickly became a symbol of resistance against injustice, sparking conversations about racial bias, accountability, and reform. From the immediate social media outrage to the involvement of world leaders and international organizations, this moment became a rallying cry for change. Sarah's story is not just one of injustice, it is also a testament to resilience, the power of public solidarity, and the fight for a fairer system. Sarah Thompson, a seasoned UN diplomat, has dedicated her career to advocating for human rights and fighting against systemic injustice. On this particular day, she was on her way to a critical United Nations conference, where she was scheduled to present a comprehensive report on systemic racism, a subject she has tirelessly worked to address. As a high-ranking diplomat, Sarah carried an official diplomatic passport and a briefcase filled with crucial documents for the conference. Her presence at the event was pivotal, as her findings were set to influence policy discussions on global human rights issues. The international airport where this incident unfolded was bustling with travelers from around the world, one of the largest and busiest airports globally. Its security and immigration protocols were known to be rigorous. Uniformed officers moved methodically as long lines of passengers waited for their documents to be processed. Among the crowd were families, business travelers, and officials like Sarah, all navigating the controlled chaos of an international transit hub. The atmosphere was a mix of anticipation and tension, a typical scene in a place where timing and documentation are paramount. When Sarah approached the passport control desk, she exuded professionalism. Dressed in a tailored suit, she handed her diplomatic passport to the officer with a polite smile and waited patiently. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern demeanor, scanned the document and immediately frowned. Without explanation, he called over a junior colleague, and the two began whispering while glancing at Sarah. She remained composed, confident that her credentials were in order. However, the officer's next words shattered the calm. "We believe your document is fake," the officer said coldly. The accusation stunned Sarah, who calmly replied, "This is an official UN passport." Despite her efforts to clarify, the officers dismissed her explanation and escalated their scrutiny. Their suspicion quickly turned into action when the senior officer grabbed a pair of scissors and cut into her passport, declaring it invalid. Shocked and humiliated, Sarah found herself at the center of a growing scene, with murmurs rising among the surrounding passengers. It was clear that this was more than a procedural misunderstanding, it was an act rooted in bias and prejudice. As Sarah Thompson stood at the passport control desk, the situation escalated rapidly. The senior officer's disbelief was palpable as he held her diplomatic passport up to the light, scrutinizing it from every angle. "This doesn't look right," he muttered to his junior colleague, who nodded in agreement without any real examination. Ignoring Sarah's calm assurances that it was an official UN document, the officers whispered and exchanged glances. their skepticism growing by the second. Then, the senior officer stepped back and made a shocking decision. "This document is fake," he declared, pulling a pair of scissors from his desk. Before Sarah could protest further, he cut into the corner of her passport, rendering it invalid. The sound of the scissors slicing through the document echoed in the busy airport hall, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. Destroying a diplomatic passport without proper verification was not only a violation of protocol but also of international law. The officer's actions, however, were fueled by prejudice rather than procedure. Maintaining her composure, Sarah took a deep breath and addressed the officer. "You have made a serious mistake," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "This is a diplomatic passport issued by the United Nations. Contact my office immediately." Her tone carried the authority of her position, but it was met with cold indifference. "You'll need to come with us for further investigation," the officer responded curtly, motioning for other airport security personnel to escort her away. As she protested the destruction of her document and demanded to speak to a supervisor, the officers ignored her and insisted she follow their lead. Even as her dignity was under attack, Sarah remained poised, determined not to let anger cloud her response. The passengers witnessing the incident began to murmur among themselves. "What's going on?" "She said she's a diplomat," one person whispered. Another passenger, a young woman with her phone out, recorded the entire scene, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is outrageous," someone else muttered loudly. The murmurs soon turned into audible protests. "This is racism," a man shouted. "She's done nothing wrong." Others joined in, demanding answers from the officers. But their voices fell on deaf ears. The video recorded by the bystander was uploaded to social media within minutes, where it gained traction almost instantly. Captioned, "UN diplomat humiliated at airport, passport destroyed." The clip resonated with viewers worldwide. Thousands shared the video, expressing their outrage and disbelief. Comments poured in, calling out the blatant bias and demanding accountability. Influential figures, including activists, journalists, and public figures, amplified the story, ensuring it reached a broader audience. As the video spread, hashtags like #JusticeForSarah and #AirportRacism began trending. Social media users demanded immediate intervention from the United Nations and the airport authorities. Within hours, the video garnered millions of views, sparking debates about systemic racism, abuse of power, and the treatment of individuals of color, even those in positions of authority. The immediate impact was undeniable. News outlets picked up the story, airing the footage alongside expert commentary on international law and racial prejudice. Journalists began contacting the airport and the United Nations for statements, intensifying the pressure on authorities to respond. Meanwhile, the airport's official social media accounts were flooded with demands for an explanation and calls for the officers involved to face consequences. Back in the airport, Sarah sat in a small interrogation room, stripped of her phone and belongings, unaware of the viral storm brewing outside. She maintained her dignity, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. But what she couldn't yet see was the groundswell of support building around her, a movement that would turn this moment of humiliation into a turning point in the fight for justice. Sarah Thompson sat in a stark, windowless interrogation room. Her personal belongings, including her phone, confiscated and placed into a plastic bag on the table. 3 officers surrounded her, while the senior immigration officer stood near the door, His arms crossed with a smug expression. "Your documents are suspicious," he stated, pointing to the torn passport as though it were evidence of wrongdoing. Sarah's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the hostility in the room. "I've already explained," she said, her voice steady. "I am a United Nations diplomat. You can verify my identity with my office." But her words were met with thinly veiled skepticism. "That's what fraudsters say," one officer retorted dismissively. Despite the mounting frustration, Sarah maintained her composure, knowing that her position and the truth were on her side. Meanwhile, the tension in the airport's waiting area was reaching a boiling point. A growing crowd of passengers demanded answers, their voices echoing through the terminal. "We saw what happened. She's innocent," someone shouted. Others joined in, chanting, "Justice for Sarah." The video of the incident continued to spread online, drawing even more attention. Reporters from local and international news outlets began arriving at the airport, cameras in hand, eager to cover the developing story. Airport officials, overwhelmed by the growing public outrage, struggled to maintain control. Their attempts to disperse the crowd only fueled the anger, with passengers defiantly holding up their phones to document every moment. At the same time, the United Nations headquarters received an urgent message from Sarah's assistant, who had managed to intercept a brief email she sent before her detention. Within minutes, high-ranking UN officials mobilized, contacting the country's government to demand her immediate release. The Secretary-General personally reached out to the airport's authorities, warning them of the grave international implications of detaining and mistreating a diplomat. Diplomats in nearby consulates were dispatched to the airport, armed with official documentation to assert Sarah's immunity and demand accountability. The combination of public pressure, media scrutiny, and UN intervention turned the incident into an international crisis. As reporters camped outside the detention area and the crowd continued to demand justice, Sarah's ordeal was no longer just a personal battle, it had become a global symbol of the fight against systemic injustice and abuse of power. 2 hours into her detention, the situation took a decisive turn. 2 consulate representatives, dressed in formal suits and exuding authority, arrived at the airport and demanded to see Sarah Thompson. Presenting their credentials to airport officials, they firmly stated, "Ms. Thompson is a United Nations diplomat under full diplomatic protection. You have no right to detain her, confiscate her belongings, or destroy her documents." Their tone left no room for argument. The senior officer, who had earlier dismissed Sarah's credentials, now looked visibly nervous, stammering that the situation was a misunderstanding. The consulate representatives were unimpressed. "This is a clear violation of international law, including the Vienna Convention. We demand her immediate release and a full explanation of your actions," one of them asserted, his voice sharp with condemnation. Meanwhile, the waiting area outside the detention room was a scene of growing solidarity. The crowd of passengers, many of whom had witnessed the incident, erupted into cheers as news of the consulate representative's arrival spread. Reporters with cameras and microphones pushed forward, capturing every moment. "Justice for Sarah," the crowd chanted, their voices echoing through the terminal. The public support was palpable, and the passengers' determination to hold the authorities accountable intensified the pressure on airport officials. Social media live streams showed the swelling crowd, with users from around the world joining in support online. The hashtags #JusticeForSarah and #EndAirportRacism continued to trend, with prominent figures amplifying the story and demanding systemic change. Finally, the detention room door opened, And Sarah emerged, escorted by the consulate representatives. As she stepped into the hallway, she was greeted by thunderous applause from the crowd. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust toward her. Sarah raised her hand to quiet the audience, her calm yet commanding presence captivating everyone. "Thank you for your support," she began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "What happened here today is not just about me. It's a reflection of the systemic bias that far too many people face every day. This is not acceptable. And it must change." Her powerful words resonated deeply, sparking another wave of applause. The immediate fallout was swift. Within hours, airport authorities announced that the officers involved in the incident had been suspended pending an investigation. The senior officer who destroyed Sarah's passport faced charges for violating international law, including the destruction of a diplomatic document. The airport's management launched an internal review, promising transparency and accountability. News of the incident dominated headlines worldwide, with journalists highlighting the broader implications of systemic bias and abuse of power. In the days that followed, the incident catalyzed conversations about airport security practices, racial profiling, and the treatment of diplomats. Governments, international organizations, and civil society groups called for sweeping reforms to ensure that such incidents would never happen again. For Sarah, the fight was far from over. Her resilience and determination turned a moment of injustice into a rallying cry for systemic change, inspiring people around the world to stand up for equality and justice. The public reaction to Sarah Thompson's ordeal was nothing short of overwhelming. Social media erupted as the video of her passport being destroyed and her unjust detention circulated globally. The hashtags #JusticeForSarah and #EndAirportRacism trended for days, with millions of posts expressing outrage, support, and calls for accountability. Protests were organized in major cities, with demonstrators holding signs that read "End Racism Now" and "Justice for Sarah." Influential activists and public figures amplified the incident, connecting it to broader discussions about systemic racism and abuse of power. The story became a rallying cry for change, with the public demanding a thorough investigation and systemic reforms to prevent such injustices in the future. Under mounting pressure, the country's government issued a formal apology to Sarah Thompson and the United Nations, acknowledging the severe violation of her diplomatic rights. In a press conference, a government spokesperson admitted the incident highlighted serious flaws in airport procedures and pledged immediate reforms. As a first step, the government announced the suspension of all officers involved in the incident, pending investigation. Additionally, they promised to implement new training programs for airport staff, focusing on recognizing and respecting diplomatic immunity, eliminating bias, and adhering to international laws. The government also established an independent oversight body to monitor airport operations and address complaints of misconduct. While these measures were welcomed, activists and the public emphasized the need for sustained accountability beyond these initial promises. For Sarah, the incident became a turning point in her career and advocacy work. In a powerful speech at the United Nations General Assembly, she recounted her experience, connecting it to the systemic bias faced by marginalized groups worldwide. This was not an isolated incident, she declared. It is a symptom of a system that fails to treat everyone with dignity and fairness. We must demand better. Her speech resonated with world leaders and citizens alike, sparking discussions about racism, power dynamics, and the urgent need for systemic change. Sarah continued her fight by collaborating with international organizations to propose concrete measures for addressing discrimination in border control and law enforcement. The incident, though harrowing, became a catalyst for progress. It demonstrated the power of collective action and the importance of holding institutions accountable. Sarah's resilience and the public's unwavering support turned a moment of injustice into a global movement for justice. Ensuring her fight for equality would leave a lasting legacy. Sarah Thompson's experience at the airport was more than an isolated act of prejudice, it was a powerful reflection of systemic issues that persist in institutions worldwide. Her ordeal, though deeply humiliating, became a turning point, bringing global attention to the misuse of authority, racial bias, and the urgent need for accountability. The swift public outcry and subsequent reforms demonstrated that when people unite against injustice, real change can occur. This incident is a reminder that even in moments of adversity, there is an opportunity to challenge the system and push for progress. This story is not just about Sarah, it is about the thousands who face similar injustices every day without the platform to fight back. Let her experience inspire all of us to question our own biases, challenge discriminatory practices, and demand systemic reform. Whether through raising awareness, supporting policies for equality, or simply educating ourselves and others, each of us has a role to play in creating a fairer world. Change begins with awareness and action. And it is only through collective effort that we can dismantle these deep-rooted systems of inequality. In the face of injustice, Sarah's resilience and the public's solidarity remind us of the strength in unity. This story, while born out of prejudice, ended in hope, a hope that together, we can build a future where fairness, dignity, and respect prevail. Let us take this moment as a call to action. Not just to support those who have been wronged, but to ensure that such incidents become a thing of the past. The fight for justice is ongoing. And with unity, empathy, and determination, we can create a world where everyone is truly equal.